The alien slave master's whip cracked across Quasar's back, shredding her exoskeleton and drawing streams of blue blood as the gathered Nasat crowd cheered with glee to see a helpless female debased for their amusement. Commander Greg Bailey shoved through the insectoid throng, feeling ready to puke at the disgusting spectacle of cruelty before him. But what turned the hardened veteran's stomach even more was how none of his fellow humans made a move to intervene in this barbaric public torture session. Greg had seen some messed up customs on his diplomatic missions before, but the brutal Nasat caste system was on a whole other level. He couldn't just stand by as this innocent girl was brutalized. His direct superior, Ambassador Zhang, grabbed Greg's arm to hold him back. "Bailey, don't even think about interfering. This is an internal Nasat matter. We need their helium-3 exports." Greg glared at Zhang before yanking his arm free. "With all due respect, sir, fuck that. Fuck their backwards-ass customs. I swore an oath to defend the helpless against scum like this, human or not." He marched right up to the slave master, a bloated grub named Zorgax, and seized the bastard's lash-wielding appendage. "This beating is over," Greg snarled in the vile creature's face. "You dare lay hands on me, human?" Zorgax spat. "I will have your head for this insolence." "Go ahead and try it, you overgrown cockroach. See what happens when you go to war with Earth." Greg knew it was a massive bluff. After centuries of space conflicts, humanity was in no shape for another war. But it worked. The cowardly master released his grip on the whip. "Okay then. I'm confiscating your slave as Weirgild for the offense dealt to me, as is permitted in Nasat law." Before Zorgax could object, Greg scooped up Quasar's bruised and bleeding form. He carried the girl to his shuttle as Nasat drones glared at him from all around. Greg's fellow humans looked on disapprovingly, too. They all wanted him to leave this poor, broken slave to her fate, to not rock the political boat. Greg had never been one to bow to the heartless calculus of realpolitik, though. He would show this girl a better way, even if it meant making the whole damn galaxy his enemy, because no one deserved to be in chains. That was the core tenet of humanity Greg believed in with all his being, and he would fight for that ideal to his dying breath, if need be. However, Greg knew in his heart this was just the beginning. Giving one slave her freedom wouldn't change an entire corrupt alien civilization, but he had to start somewhere in bringing light to this dark universe. Even if Greg ended up standing alone against the forces of tyranny and oppression, for the sake of innocent souls like Quasar, he would be that sole candle shining defiantly against the void. As a wise man once said, "Give me liberty, or give me death." In this moment, Greg fully committed to living those immortal words, no matter where that righteous path led him. He only prayed he had the strength to see it through. Greg arrived back on Earth with Quasar in tow, her wounds treated, but her spirit still shaken from the brutal abuse she had endured. He wasted no time in taking his case straight to the top, demanding meetings with the President, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and key members of the World Congress. In conference rooms and private offices, he laid out the grim realities of the Nasat slave system that he had witnessed firsthand. He described the casual cruelty, the institutionalized oppression, the way the elites profited from the suffering of the lower castes. Greg made Quasar's story the centerpiece of his argument, putting a face to the abstract concept of injustice. "We have the technological edge," Greg insisted, pounding the table for emphasis. "We can use that leverage to force change, embargo their trade, jam their comms, blockade their system if we have to. We can't just sit back and let this horror show continue." But he was met with hesitation and hand-wringing from the politicians. They fretted about the risks of interfering in another species' affairs, about getting bogged down in an unwinnable counterinsurgency if the Nasat resisted. Humanity was exhausted from ages of interstellar conflict, they said. The people wanted to focus on rebuilding Earth, not crusading across the cosmos. "The cost is too high," the president said with a sigh. "I'm sorry, Greg, but we just can't take this on right now. The Nasat will have to solve their own problems." Greg stormed out, his appeals rejected, but he refused to give up. If the leaders wouldn't act, he'd take his case directly to the people. He went on every vidcast and news program that would have him, telling his story over and over again. At rallies in city squares, he fired up the crowds with thundering condemnations of Nasat tyranny. "Never again," Greg shouted, his voice booming from the podium. "That's what we said after the horrors of our past, but will we look away now just because the victims have another shape? If we believe in the promise of liberty, it has to be liberty for all." The movement grew, but so did the pushback. Pundits denounced Greg as a reckless warmonger. Reactionary politicians stirred up xenophobic fury, painting the Nasat as a threat to humanity's purity. Angry mobs smashed alien-owned shops and beat anyone who looked too foreign. Through it all, Quasar remained at Greg's side, his most trusted advisor and confidant. She helped him understand the complexities of Nasat culture, the key pressure points to push. At great personal risk, she reached out to members of the nascent abolition movement back on Zorgax, letting them know they had allies beyond the stars. "You are a hero to my people," she told Greg one night as they pored over intelligence reports, "and a villain to the powerful. There is a price on my head now in every stronghold of the elites." Greg took her hand, meeting her compound gaze. "I won't let any harm come to you. Not again, no matter what it takes." The break in the case came from an unexpected source. An official in the Defense Ministry, sickened by what he had learned, passed Greg classified files detailing a vast arms smuggling ring. For years, a cadre of human officers had been secretly slipping the Nasat advanced weapons in exchange for rare elements and alien tech. The Nasat slave system was being propped up by human greed. Greg marched into the congressional hearing room and slapped the evidence down on the rosewood table. The rogue officers were in league with the same slaving scum who tortured Quasar, he told the stone-faced representatives. This wasn't just a moral struggle anymore, but a matter of vital human security. The tide began to turn. After rancorous debate, the World Congress authorized Greg's plan. A battle fleet was dispatched to the Nasat home system, a steel gauntlet to back up the diplomatic pressure. In a tense meeting hall on Zorgax, Greg faced the Nasat leadership, Quasar at his side translating in urgent whispers. He laid out the terms: abolition of slavery, free elections, integration into galactic institutions. End the nightmare now, or face the consequences. The Nasat elders vibrated with indignation, their wing casings rattling. One reached for a weapon, but froze when Greg flashed a display showing Earth's armada hanging in orbit, railguns trained on the capital. At the brink of war, Quasar spoke up. Turning to the assembled Nasat, she delivered a speech that would echo through history, carried on every screen and speaker across the planet. "We are one people, one species," she said, her voice ringing out. "The elites have kept us divided, taught us to hate each other, so they can cling to power on our backs. But no more. A new dawn is breaking, my brothers and sisters, if we have the courage to seize it. I have seen the promise of freedom, and I will fight for it to my last breath. Will you join me?" In that moment, something fundamental shifted. Workers cast off their tools and rose up in the factories. Slaves tore the chips from their necks and lifted their voices in songs of defiance. When the security forces tried to crush the uprising, they found their own ranks splitting, the lower castes turning on their masters. Across Zorgax, the edifice of oppression began to crumble. Statues of the elites were toppled into the dust. Grim fortresses were stormed and prisons flung open. Desperate to cling to power, a few Nasat lords offered Greg any price for his support. He spat on their bribes. There would be no compromise with slavers. Finally, the broken leadership of Zorgax conceded. Slavery was abolished with the stroke of a pen, and a provisional government established to oversee the transition to democracy. In the great square of the capital, Quasar wept in Greg's arms as the proclamation was read aloud, and 1,000,000 Nasat voices roared to the skies in jubilation. In the aftermath, as the hard work of building a free society began, Greg and Quasar were married in a joyous ceremony attended by beings from 100 worlds. More than a personal bond, it was a powerful symbol of the new era of cooperation between humans and Nasat. The war-weary people of Earth, so long distrustful of aliens, began to soften as they saw the images of human and insectoid hands joined in common cause. But Greg and Quasar both knew that this was only the beginning. The weapons smugglers within the human government still had to be rooted out and brought to justice for their crimes. And the shattered Nasat society would need much guidance to heal the deep wounds left by generations of oppression. Quasar dedicated herself to that cause, setting up schools and councils to integrate the freed slaves into the new order. There would be difficult days ahead as two cultures learned to live and work together. Ancient prejudices on both sides would not be easily erased, but with their love for each other and their shared commitment to justice, Greg and Quasar vowed to face whatever challenges lay before them. For they had seen the brightening dawn, and they would not rest until its light shone on all the worlds of their enwoven cosmic destiny. Greg Bailey wiped sweat from his brow as he stepped out of the transport onto the barren surface of Zorgax. The acrid stench of industrial waste assaulted his nostrils. Before him stretched a sprawling labor camp, its electrified fences stark against the alien landscape. "Let's go," he said to his team of human rights inspectors. "Stay alert." They passed through the gates, Greg's jaw clenching at the sight of emaciated Nasat workers shuffling past. Their exoskeletons were cracked and dull, antennae drooping listlessly. In the main processing facility, the true horrors revealed themselves. Nasat toiled at hazardous chemical vats without protective gear. Overseers wielded shock prods, zapping any who faltered. "This ends now," Greg snarled, striding toward a brutish overseer. "By order of Earth, this facility is shut down effective immediately." The overseer chittered in outrage. "You have no authority here, human." Greg held up a hollow badge. "I have full authority from your new government. These workers are free. Anyone who tries to stop them leaving will be arrested." Chaos erupted as the news spread. Nasat workers fled their stations. Elite guards moved to block exits. "Stand down!" Greg bellowed. Human peacekeepers materialized, weapons raised. In the ensuing pandemonium, Quasar's voice cut through on the facility's PA system. She spoke in the Nasat language, her words soothing the panicked masses. "Brothers and sisters, do not be afraid," she said. "The chains of bondage have been broken. You are free. Please proceed calmly to the transports outside. Food, medical care, and shelter await you." Greg watched in awe as the freed Nasat filed out in orderly lines, Quasar's presence a balm to their raw nerves. But he saw the toll it took on her, her eyes haunted as she witnessed their suffering. Later, in their quarters, Quasar wept in Greg's arms. "The things they endured, Greg. It's beyond words." He stroked her carapace gently. "I know, but we're going to make it right." The next weeks were a whirlwind. Greg oversaw the conversion of a massive factory complex, ripping out the cruel tools of forced labor and installing state-of-the-art robotics. "This will triple your output while adhering to galactic labor standards," he explained to the Nasat managers. One of them, Zixta, bristled. "And put thousands out of work. How will we maintain our profit margins?" Greg's eyes narrowed. "Your profit margins were built on slavery. That ends now. Adapt or face the consequences." The consequences came swiftly for those who resisted change. When reports reached Greg of the oligarch Vex Corps attempting to smuggle captive workers off-world, he sprang into action. "Surround that ship," Greg ordered over the comm as his security team swooped in. "No one leaves until we've searched every compartment." They found dozens of terrified Nasat crammed into hidden cargo holds. Vex Corps was dragged away in restraints, shrieking threats. "Make an example of him," Greg told the prosecutors. "The galaxy needs to see that this will not be tolerated." The trial was broadcast across Nasat space, Greg testified, laying out in stark detail the abuses he'd witnessed. When the guilty verdict came down, a clear message was sent. The old ways were over. But not everyone accepted the new order. As Greg toured a nearly completed habitat city, admiring its gleaming spires and lush gardens, an explosion rocked the site. Alarms blared. Greg grabbed his comm unit. "Report." "Radical purists," came the response. "They've sabotaged the main reactor. If it goes critical..." Greg was already running, barking orders. "Evacuate the area. Get those coolant systems online." He plunged into the smoke-filled reactor chamber, working alongside human and NASAT engineers to avert disaster. When the crisis passed, Greg emerged soot-stained but victorious. Yet the near catastrophe shook him. That night, he pored over intelligence reports with Quasar. "They're getting bolder," she said, mandibles clicking nervously. "My contacts say there's talk of armed rebellion among the hardliners." Greg's fists clenched. "Then we need to work faster. Show the people a better way before violence tears this world apart." He redoubled his efforts, pushing through radical reforms. New clinics opened, offering hope to NASAT mutilated by their former masters. Counseling centers helped the newly freed process their trauma. But with each step forward, the backlash grew. Protests erupted in elite enclaves. Terrorist attacks increased. The moderate NASAT leaders Greg worked with faced death threats. As tensions rose, Greg knew they were racing against time. The dream of a truly free and equal NASAT society hung in the balance, and dark forces gathered, preparing to plunge the planet into civil war. Greg Bailey stood at the viewport of the command ship, watching Zorgax's surface burn. Orbital strikes lit up the night, pounding Krulak's fortified factories into rubble. On the tactical display, waves of dropships descended, disgorging troops to mop up the remaining resistance. "Status report," Greg barked into the comm. "Sir, we've breached the outer defenses," a gruff voice replied. "Krulak's forces are in full retreat, but sir, we're taking heavy casualties. These bastards are fighting to the last man." Greg's teeth clenched. He'd hoped to avoid this bloodshed, but Krulak had forced his hand. His thoughts turned to Quasar, lying broken in the medbay. The doctors weren't sure if she'd make it. "Push forward," Greg ordered. "I want Krulak's head by dawn." As the battle raged, Greg paced the bridge. Reports flooded in of vicious street-to-street fighting. Krulak's loyalists had turned the industrial zone into a fortress and were making the human NASAT coalition pay dearly for every inch. A cheer went up as news came that Krulak's command center had fallen. But any sense of triumph was short-lived. Greg's comm chirped with an urgent message from Earth. "Bailey, what the hell is going on out there?" The gruff voice of Admiral Hawthorne filled the bridge. "I'm getting reports of massive collateral damage, civilian casualties in the thousands. This wasn't the plan." Greg's fists clenched. "With all due respect, sir, the situation changed when Quasar was attacked. Krulak crossed a line. We're finishing this, here and now." "Damn it, Bailey, you're supposed to be building bridges, not burning them. I've got the Security Council breathing down my neck. They're talking about pulling your mandate." "Then pull it," Greg snapped. "But don't expect me to half-ass this. Not after what they did to her." The line went dead. Greg turned back to the viewport, watching fireballs bloom across the planet's surface. He'd worry about the political fallout later. For now, there was a war to win. Days later, Greg stood in the ruins of Krulak's citadel. The oligarch's body lay nearby, riddled with plasma burns. He'd died leading a final, suicidal charge against the human lines. A NASAT aide approached, mandibles clicking nervously. "Sir, we've secured the data cores. You'll want to see this." Greg's eyes widened as he scanned the files. Weapons shipments, backdoor deals, names of human industrialists who'd been arming the separatists. It was all there, in black and white. "Contact Earth," Greg growled. "Tell them I want warrants issued for every last one of these sons of bitches. No one gets to play both sides of this conflict." But even as the dust settled, new fires were already smoldering. Across Zorgax, remnants of Krulak's forces melted into the shadows. Terrorist attacks rocked newly liberated cities. And in the corridors of power back on Earth, Voices were rising in opposition to Greg's hardline tactics. Greg barely slept, dividing his time between hunting down insurgents and sitting vigil at Quasar's bedside. Her condition remained critical, her once vibrant exoskeleton now dull and lifeless. "Don't you dare give up," he whispered, clasping her motionless claw. "We've come too far. I can't do this without you." As the days wore on, Greg felt the weight of command bearing down on him. The moderate Nasat factions were growing restless, alarmed by his increasingly draconian methods. But every time he considered easing up, he thought of Quasar, broken and bleeding in Krulak's dungeon. No, there could be no half measures. Not anymore. Greg began drafting plans for internment camps to house those who refused to embrace the new order. It left a bitter taste in his mouth, but he saw no other way to root out the cancer of extremism. "Set up a briefing with the regional governors," he told his staff. "It's time to take the gloves off. Anyone who so much as looks at a weapon sideways gets locked up. We'll sort out the innocents later." As Greg stared out at the scarred landscape of Zorgax, he wondered if this was how tyrants were born. One compromise at a time, all in the name of a greater good. But he pushed the doubts aside. He had promises to keep, a world to rebuild, and a reckoning to deliver. Greg Bailey paced the sterile corridors of his command center, the harsh fluorescent lights casting deep shadows across his haggard face. Screens lining the walls flickered with real-time footage of Zorgax's cities, each image a testament to the chaos engulfing the planet. In one feed, human marines in bulky exosuits stormed a crumbling tenement, plasma rifles spitting blue fire. Nasat civilians scattered in terror, their chitinous bodies gleaming in the inferno. Another showed the smoldering ruins of what had once been an opulent district, now reduced to ash and rubble. Greg's comm unit chirped, "Sir, we've secured the target, awaiting further orders." He tapped the device. "Extract any intel, then send them to Site Omega. Use whatever means necessary." "Understood, sir." Greg cut the connection, a cold knot forming in his gut. He pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the tactical display before him. Red icons representing pockets of resistance blinked across the map. With each passing day, more appeared. A subordinate approached, datapad in hand. "Latest intel, sir. We've identified 3 more human operatives funneling weapons to the Separatists." Greg's eyes narrowed as he scanned the report. "Damn it! How deep does this go?" He thumped his hand on the console. "I want them found. Now." "Sir, some of these names, they're well connected. If we move against them without proper—" "I don't give a damn about proper channels," Greg snarled. "They're traitors, all of them, feeding this conflict for profit while good people die." The subordinate flinched. "Yes, sir. I'll make the arrangements." As the man scurried away, Greg felt the weight of countless sleepless nights bearing down on him. He made his way to the medical wing, his steps echoing in the empty hallway. The antiseptic smell hit him as he entered Quasar's room. She lay motionless on the bed, her once vibrant exoskeleton now dull and lifeless. Only the steady beep of monitoring equipment broke the silence. Greg sank into the chair beside her, taking her unresponsive claw in his hand. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm trying to finish what we started, but it's all falling apart." He closed his eyes, remembering the passionate idealist who had first championed the Nasat cause. Where had that man gone? A commotion in the hallway jolted him from his reverie. Greg emerged to find Lyra, Quasar's devoted follower, being restrained by security personnel. "You must listen," Lyra cried, her mandibles clicking frantically. "This path leads only to more suffering. Quasar would never—" "Enough," Greg roared. He strode forward, looming over the Nasat. "You dare speak for her, while she lies broken because of the very scum you'd have me coddle?" Lyra's compound eyes met his gaze unflinchingly. "I speak for the dream you both shared, for the hope of true reconciliation. These black sites, these enhanced interrogations, they make you no better than those you claim to fight." Greg recoiled as if struck. For a moment, Doubt flickered across his face. Then his features hardened once more. "Take her away," he growled. "Charge her with treason." As Lyra was dragged off, her cries echoing down the hall, Greg retreated to his office. He poured himself a stiff drink, hands shaking slightly as he raised the glass to his lips. On his desk, reports piled up, casualty figures, insurgent attacks, whispers of unrest among the Nasset moderates. Greg stared at them, seeing not numbers and words, but the yawning chasm between the world he'd dreamed of and the reality he'd created. He activated his comm unit. "This is Bailey. Implement Protocol Sigma. I want every suspected collaborator rounded up within the hour." As acknowledgments flooded in, Greg turned to the window. Beyond the reinforced glass, Zorgax burned, and in that inferno, the last embers of his idealism turned to ash.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.